you want to vote down the government at your earliest opportunity. Do you still stand by that statement, and do you think now is the time for an election?
Now is the time to put workers first. We're literally in a trade war. And I can't imagine any opposition leader that wouldn't want to support a package to help workers impacted by this. We did that during the pandemic. We came together. We need to have that same approach now. So my answer to that is we need supports for workers first, put in place working, an election afterwards.
And what's the plan for, how long would you see something like that? This tariff war could go on for 4 years. So how long would these measures that you're suggesting go on for? And how are we paying for it?
So the employment insurance should be permanent changes to the employment insurance that cover workers when they're impacted. That is something that we've long needed. And so now I'm saying I want that fix in place now, immediately done so that workers can count on it, so it's there for them. And then the measures in terms of the economic stimulus, well, we need it immediately. We need a short-term fix. And as we move towards building a more resilient economy, we can look at ways to adjust it. But there's no doubt with the current circumstances, our reliance and dependence on the United States and the trade war that we find ourselves in, we need to build Canadian by Canadian, and that is something that's going to be short-term, but I expect it to be a long-term permanent shift where we use the buying power we have to invest in our country.
What specifically do you need Parliament to return for? The EI reforms, does that require legislation, or isn't that not something that the government can do without Parliament coming back?
We saw in the pandemic that we understood the severity of the situation required us to come together, to pass legislation, to be able to support Canadians. This is worse than the pandemic. The potential ramifications of this trade war could have devastating impacts on our economy worse than what we saw during that period of time. And so we absolutely need to have the ability to come back to Parliament to get things done. And what I'm saying is I want supports for workers done first. An election is secondary to that. First, let's get the support in place for those workers. Let's make sure they get the help that they need. People are already losing their jobs, and then we can worry about an election after that.
So you would need to see this legislation, or if it would require legislation, see it receive royal assent before you'd be comfortable going to an election? Obviously, if there was legislation towards that, it would die on the order paper once an election was called. So is that what you're saying? You'd need to see it become law or pass through the Senate and return back?
Yeah, I don't want just a lip service. I want protections in place for workers, passed and implemented, helping out people. We literally have a dire situation. 25% tariffs on our country will mean potentially hundreds and thousands of workers lose their jobs. So to Canadians listening, my commitment to you is I promise I'm going to fight to protect your jobs. I promise I'm going to fight to make sure workers impacted get help. And I promise that I'm going to put in place supports that I can do so that people who are worried about the cost of living that's already so high going up, I'm going to fight to make sure life is more affordable.
Just elaborate more on what type of measures you'd like to see in support of workers or businesses. Are you looking for pandemic-style relief?
We are in what could be worse than the pandemic in terms of the impacts to our economy and to workers. So we need across-the-board supports for workers impacted. My first reaction now is we need EI that is actually up to the task. And so we've been calling for reforms for a while now. I want that to be put in place. EI that is quicker to access, that covers more workers, that is the sufficient amount so you can actually pay your bills. The current replacement fee or the replacement salary is not enough to cover the cost for many families. So we need an adequate EI to meet the needs of today.